Wet your hands with water. Apply soap, rub your hands palm to palm and wash the backs of both hands and in between your fingers. Then palm to palm with fingers interlocked. Clasp your hands together and rub. And then clean around the thumbs too. Rub your fingertips in the palms of your hands and finish off with the wrists. Rinse your hands really well with water and dry them thoroughly with a paper towel. Use the towel to turn off the tap. Your hands are now clean.
Good morning, students. This school is AZIZI. How are you doing today? I hope you well. Today we're going to read and understand the 5th chapter, The Happy Prince, from your English book, Moments. This was written by Oscar Wilde, who was an Irish poet and playwright. Irish, the people who live in Ireland, they're called Irish. This chapter is about a happy prince whose statue was high above the city on a tall column. And it's also about a singing bird, swallow. So swallow, S-W-A-L-L-O-W. Here it means a singing bird. It's the name of a singing bird. So I'll just read the paragraphs for you, especially the first one. The happy prince was a beautiful statue. He was covered with gold. He had sapphires for eyes and a ruby in his sword. Why did he want to part with all the gold that he had and his precious stones? So now you know that the happy prince was a statue. And that statue was covered with gold. For his eyes, he had sapphires. Sapphires, they are precious gemstone. And ruby is also a precious gemstone. So he had ruby in his sword. So why did he want to part with all the gold that he had and his precious stones? Let's find out. Let's find out. So we read this paragraph and find it out. High above the city on a tall column stood the statue of the happy prince. He was gilded all over with thin leaves of fine gold. For eyes he had 2 bright sapphires, and a large red ruby glowed on his sword hilt. Hilt means is the handle of the sword. So high above the city there was a column, tall column, is a base basically where you could build a statue, anything. So there was a statue of the happy prince. And that statue was gilded, covered with thin leaves of fine gold. So the statue was basically decorated with gold, and for his bright eyes, he had sapphires, the precious gemstones, and a large red color ruby, the stone again, was glowing on his sword hilt. Hilt is the handle. One night there flew over the city a little swallow. His friends had gone away to Egypt 6 weeks before, but he had stayed behind. Then he decided to go to Egypt too. So what happened one night? A little swallow, the bird, I told you, a singing bird, came to that city. And his friends had gone to Egypt. Egypt is a country 6 weeks before. But he didn't go. So now he had decided to go to Egypt too. All day long he flew, and at a night he arrived at the city. "Where shall I put up?" he said. "I hope the town has made preparations." Then he saw the statue on the tall column. "I'll put up there," he cried. "It is a fine position with plenty of fresh air." So he alighted just between the feet of the happy prince. So while he was flying, so he flown all day, and when the night began, he thought to take some rest. So he wandered all over the city, and finally he saw the column where the statue of the happy prince was. So he decided to stay there, and he just alighted between the feet of the happy prince. "I have a golden bedroom," he said softly to himself as he looked around. And he prepared to go to sleep. But just as he was putting his head under his wing, a large drop of water fell on him. "What a curious thing," he cried. "There is not a single cloud in the sky. The stars are quite clear and bright, and yet it is raining." So when he alighted between the feet of the happy prince and he looked around, so obviously he saw there was gold all around him, because the statue was covered with gold. So he talked to himself that he got golden bedroom. And when he was just going to put his head under his wing to go and sleep, suddenly what happened? He felt a drop of water, and he became curious because he could not see any cloud in the sky, and the stars were shining as well. So he wondered how could rain started. Then another drop fell. "What is the use of a statue if it cannot keep the rain off?" he said. "I must look for a good chimney pot," and he determined to fly away. So now he started thinking that what was the use of that statue if it could not cover him from the rain, from dropping the water. So he thought that he should go somewhere else. So he thought that it would be good to find chimney pot and sleep there. So as soon as he started to fly, but before he had opened his wings, a third drop fell, and he looked up and saw, what did he see? So as he was just about to fly, in fact, so again water dropped, and he just looked up to find out where the water was coming from. And what did he see? The eyes of the happy prince were filled with tears, and tears were running down his golden cheeks. His face was so beautiful in the moonlight that the little swallow was filled with pity. So what he saw when he looked up he saw that the happy prince's eyes were filled with tears, and tears were coming down through his golden cheeks. And he also saw that his face, the happy prince's face, was looking so beautiful in the moonlight. So he filled with pity. "Who are you?" he said. "I am the happy prince." "Why are you weeping then?" asked the swallow. "You have quite drenched me." So now the bird asked the statue, "Who are you?" And the statue replied that he was the happy prince. And then again the bird asked as why he was weeping, crying. And he also complained that he drenched him. "When I was alive and had a human heart," answered the statue, "I did not know what tears were. For I lived in the palace where sorrow is not allowed to enter. My courtiers called me the happy prince, and happy indeed I was. So I lived, and so I died. And now that I am dead, they have set me up here so high that I cannot see that I can see the ugliness and all the misery of my city. And though my heart is made of lead, yet I cannot choose but weep." So now the happy prince, the statue, told the swallow, the singing bird, he was sad, he was crying, because when he was alive and he lived in the palace, he didn't know what were tears, what was sorrow. He was very happy in there. So the courtiers, the people in the court in that palace, called him the happy prince, and he was very happy until he died. And when he was dead, obviously the people had set him up there on so high, and now he could see the ugliness of the city and all the misery. Ugly is like bad, not beautiful. Misery, all the problems. So because the statue was so high, at the very highest place in the city, so the statue could see the ugliness and all the miseries of the city. And because his heart was still made of a metal lead, it's basically lead means is it's a soft and soft metal that could be melted. You must have seen this thing in batteries, the black one, which is hard, but when you put in the hot with sunshine or heat it, then it gets melted. So obviously all his body was made of something else, very hard, and also covered with the gold, which is a hard metal as well. But still he had a very soft heart. So he could not do anything else but weep, looking at the problems of the city. What? Is he not solid gold? Said the swallow to himself. He was too polite to make any personal remarks. Far away, continued the statue in a low musical voice. Far away, in a little street, there is a poor house. One of the windows is open, and through it I can see a woman seated at a table. Her face is thin and worn, and she has coarse red hands, all pricked by the needle, for she is seamstress. So now the statue, the happy prince, started saying to the bird, swallow, that he could see far away from that place there was a house, poor house. It was not properly built. And because one of the windows was open, so he could see through that window that there was a woman sitting on a table. And her face was weakened, thin and worn. You should read together, and that means weakened, means she looked quite weak by her face. And she has coarse, you should pronounce CAS, C-O-A-R-S-E, CAS. Okay, and that means rough. So she also had rough red hands and all pricked. Pricked means there were tiny small holes on her hands due to the whenever she was using needles, and the needles made holes on her hands. So those holes are called pricked. For she is seamstress. Seamstress is a woman who sieves for living. Sieves, like sieving cloths, stitching things. She is embroidering flowers on a satin gown for the loveliest of the queen's maids of honor to wear at the next court ball. In a bed in the corner of the room, her little boy is lying ill. He has a fever and is asking his mother to give him oranges. His mother has nothing to give him but river water. So he is crying, "Swallow, swallow, little swallow, will you not bring her the ruby out of my sword hilt? My feet are fastened to this pedestal and I cannot move." So now the happy prince, because he could see through the window, he described what was happening there. So he told the swallow, the singing bird, that woman was embroidering flowers on a satin gown. Embroidering, we call it here dardozi things, like when you making designs with something on a fabric, so that's called embroidery. Okay, so she was doing embroidering flowers on a satin gown. Satin is a kind of fabric for the loveliest of the queen's maid of honor. So she was preparing that cloth, that gown for the queens, and that was an occasion to wear at the court ball. Court ball is mainly, you must have heard this word, is like gathering and dancing. In a bed in the corner of the room, her little boy was lying ill. He had fever. So he could also see that in a bed in the corner of that room, her son was lying there and he had fever. He was ill, he was sick. And he was asking his mother to give him oranges. But his mother was so poor, she could not give him oranges, but the river water. So she could only give him water from the river. And that's the reason the happy prince, calling the bird, "Swallow, swallow, little swallow, would you not take out the red ruby from the sword hilt and give it to that woman?" And the happy prince also said that because he was fastened with this pedestal. Pedestal is that base of that statue, of that column. So he could not move, he could not go himself. "I am waited for in Egypt," said the swallow. "My friends are flying up and down the Nile and talking to the large lotus flowers. Soon they will go to sleep." So the bird, firstly, he started giving excuse. Not excuse, he in fact told the truth that his friends had already gone to Egypt and they were waiting for him. And he also mentioned about the river Nile. I'm sure you know this river, that's in Egypt. And he mentioned about that his friends were there and talking to the large lotus flowers, and soon they will go to sleep. The prince asked the swallow to stay with him for one night and be his messenger. "The boy is so thirsty and the mother so sad," he said. So the happy prince requested the little bird to stay with him for one night and be his messenger. Messenger? So basically he wanted him to take that message. Well, the message was the ruby, the precious gemstone, to take that to the woman. And he mentioned that the boy was very thirsty and his mother was very sad. "I don't think I like boys," answered the swallow. "I want to go to Egypt." So the little bird was not ready to be messenger, and he said that he didn't like the boys. But the happy prince looked so sad that the little swallow was sorry. "It is very cold here," he said, but he agreed to stay with him for one night and be his messenger. So now, because the happy prince looked so sad, so the little swallow felt sorry for him, and he agreed to stay there and be his messenger. But he also said it was very cold out there. "Thank you, little swallow," said the prince. The swallow picked out the great ruby from the prince's sword and flew away with it in his beak over the roofs of the town. So now, as the prince had asked the bird, so the bird took out that precious gemstone, the ruby, from the prince's sword, and he took it to, he flew away with that in his beak over the roofs of the towns, over the roofs that means here obviously over the houses. He passed by the cathedral tower where the white marble angels were sculptured. He passed by the palace and heard the sound of dancing. A beautiful girl came out on the balcony with her lover. I hope my dress will be ready in time for the state ball, she said. I have ordered flowers to be embroidered on it, but the seamstress are so lazy. So while he was passing through the houses, the palace, he also passed over the cathedral tower. Cathedral is church. So he passed by the cathedral tower, and he saw that white marbles angels were sculptured. White marble angels. So the people were making. They were angels. A statue of angels were sculptured, were built, and was the with the white marble. And he also passed by the palace. And when he was passing by the palace, he heard the sound of dancing. So there was dance going on in the palace. And then a beautiful girl came out on the balcony with her lover. And she was mentioning about that dress which was being embroidered by that seamstress, by that woman. So she was just talking to her lover, her partner, that she hoped that her dress would be ready on time for the state ball, she said. And she thought that the seamstress were very lazy. He passed over the river and saw the lanterns hanging on the mast of the ships. Masts, I'll show you the picture. This is basically the poles like poles on the ships, on the small the boats and ships, that helps to control the wind, and it also helped to drive basically. Look at the picture and then you'll know what is called the mast. So when he was passing over the river, he saw lanterns. Here in India we call lalten. If you have heard this word, I'll show you the picture. That is obviously old as still in villages. You can see this. We used to have kerosene to help burning that lanterns. At last he came to the poor woman's house and looked in. The boy was tossing feverishly on his bed, and the mother had fallen asleep. She was so tired, he hoped, and laid the great ruby on the table beside the woman's thimble. Thimble? What's thimble? Thimble is, it could be either made of plastic or metal. This is basically just like a cap for fingers. So again, look at this picture, and these caps are used by the whoever obviously doing stitching with the needle by hand. So finally he arrived at that poor woman's house and looked in. The boy was tossing feverishly on his bed. Feverishly, obviously he had fever, and the mother had fallen asleep, and the woman, she was sleeping. She was very tired, So what the bird did, he just put that ruby on the table beside the woman's thimble. Thimble, I told you that. Then he flew gently round the bed, finding the boy's forehead with his wings. How could I feel? Said the boy. I must be getting better. And he sank into a delicious slumber. Slumber means a sleep, a nice sleep. So after dropping that ruby, the precious gemstone, nearby that thimble, woman's thimble, he just flew gently around the bed, and with his wing, he just flapped his wing to give some air to that boy. And he felt very cool, and the boy said now he was feeling a lot better, and now he should go for a sleep. So because he had fever, so he was not able to sleep, while his mother had fallen asleep because she was very tired embroidering that satin gown. Then the swallow flew back to the happy prince and told him what he had done. It is curious, he remarked, but I feel quite warm now, although it is so cold. So after finishing his job, he flew back to the happy prince and told him whatever he had done there. So now the happy prince was quite happy, and he gave his remark that now he was feeling warm. So that means he was feeling good, he was feeling okay, although it was very cold out there. That is because you have done a good action, said the prince. So the prince told the swallow because he had done very good work, and that's why he was feeling very good. And the little swallow began to think and then fell asleep. Thinking always made him sleepy. Now the small bird, the singing bird, started to think and then fell to sleep. And he always did the same thing because when he starts thinking, then it takes him to a good sleep. When day broke, he flew down to the river and had a bath. Tonight I go to Egypt, said the swallow. And he was in high spirits at the prospect. He visited all the monuments and sat a long time on top of the church steeple. So when the morning began, he flew down to the river and he took a bath there. And he thought that he would go to Egypt that night. He was very happy, he was in very high spirits. So he visited all the monuments and sat a long time on top of the church steeple. Steeple is the tower. So you must have seen the tower, the long thing on the buildings, especially on church. So he visited all the monuments and he sat a long time on top of the church steeple. When the moon rose, he flew back to the happy prince. So when obviously it started getting dark and the moon come, then he flew back to the happy prince. Have you any commissions for Egypt? He cried. I'm just starting. So now he was asking the happy prince if he had any instructions for Egypt, because now he was about to fly and go to Egypt. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince, will you stay with me one night longer? So now the happy prince said to the bird again, swallow, swallow, would you not stay with the happy prince, with him for one more night? I'm waited for in Egypt, answered the swallow. So now swallow said to the happy prince he had to go because his friends were waiting in Egypt. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince, far away across the city I see a young man in a garret. He is leaning over a desk covered with papers, and in the glass by his side there is a bunch of withered violets. His hair is brown and crispy, and his lips are red as a pomegranate, and he has large and dreamy eyes. So now the happy prince started saying to the bird that he could see that far away he saw a young man in a garret. Garret is a room, a small room, especially under the roof. It's like attic. I'll show you the picture. Look at the picture. This is called attic in the house. So he was describing a scene that where he could see a young man. He was leaning over a desk covered with papers. So he was sitting and leaning over the desk, and there were papers on the desk. And he could see also they were withered violets, withered, dry, and when the flowers get dried, so that's called withered, and the violets are flowers. The color are like violet color, in fact. So he could see in a glass there were withered violets, and he also described that his hair was brown and crispy, and his lips were red just like pomegranate. Pomegranate is a fruit. And he had large and dreamy eyes. He's trying to finish a play for the director of the theater, but he is too cold to write anymore. There is no fire in the grate, and hunger has made him faint. So he could see that he had to finish writing. He was writing a play for his director of the theater, but he was not able to write any single word because it was very cold out there in that room. There was no fire, and he was also hungry, so that made him faint. He was not in his conscious. That's all for day today, and don't forget to watch the next part of the video to find out what happened at last, and also make your notes to discuss with me in our online classes. So enjoy your day ahead. Have a good day. Bye bye.